This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Countries tighten measures to fight the coronavirus. Italy reports a surge in deaths with 627 fatalities. And in the UK, the government has ordered the closure of public spaces, including cafes, bars and restaurants. All this and more in our coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic. Plus, massive deforestation in Somalia linked to illegal trade in charcoal. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. Uganda turns to the World Bank for a $190 million cushion against the economic impact of the coronavirus. And in sports, South Africa's Legends Youth Football Club disappointed following the cancellation of the Manchester City Abu Dhabi Cup due to the coronavirus pandemic. We begin with the latest figures on the coronavirus pandemic. The global death toll and the number of cases continues to surge. The latest data from leading American research university Johns Hopkins reveals more than 275,000 people have been infected. Italy has the largest outbreak outside China. It saw a record high in the number of daily infections and new deaths on Friday. It's followed by Spain, which has more than 21,000 infections. Iran, the worst hit country in the Middle East, has reported nearly 20,000 cases and over 1,400 deaths. The United States has seen over 5,000 new cases, bringing the total to 19,000. South Korea has over 8,000 cases. The Chinese mainland registered no new locally transmitted cases for a third straight day, but it did find 41 new imported cases. Hubei province has reported no suspected cases. 88% of patients in China have recovered. Now in Africa, 39 countries across the continent have reported over 900 cases of COVID-19. Let's take a look at those numbers by region. Now, Northern Africa has the highest number of confirmed cases. Egypt, in Egypt, cases have jumped to 285 from 256. Algeria now has 90 cases of the coronavirus, mostly in the Blida area south of the capital. Meanwhile, Morocco has 74 confirmed cases of COVID-19. The government has closed all mosques, schools and entertainment venues and has banned all international passenger flights. In West Africa, Senegal has the highest number of infections. Niger and Cape Verde, on the other hand, have announced their index cases. Ghana's cases, on the other hand, have risen to 16 as the country confirmed 5 new cases. In East Africa, 6 more people have tested positive for the virus in Rwanda, bringing the total number to 17. In Central Africa, Chad has confirmed its first case of the coronavirus, a Moroccan national who had traveled to the country from Cameroon. Numbers are also rising in Southern Africa. Zimbabwe has confirmed its first case, while South Africa remains the worst affected with 202 cases. Well, as mentioned there, Zimbabwe has indeed recorded its first case of the coronavirus. The refurbishment and upgrade of the country's main designated coronavirus isolation center is now underway. Wilkins Hospital will see its holding capacity increased and some additional facilities installed following a donation from the Chinese embassy and the business community in the southern African country. Farai Makutoya has more.
The $500,000 facelift is well underway, and an additional 1 million Chinese yuan has been pledged to help Zimbabwe scale up its preparedness for the COVID-19 pandemic. Harare's Wilkins Hospital is its main isolation center, where at least 14 suspected cases have been tested. Its 35-bed capacity is set to be increased, and other facilities currently lacking will be installed during the upgrade. The timely assistance is yet another reminder of the strong relations between the two nations.
And because Zimbabwe holds a special place in our heart. Today's ceremony is a testament to to how deep our friendship has struck its roots. A group of Chinese private business, while facing difficulties themselves in the current economic climate, have decided helping Zimbabwe is not something that can wait.
Zimbabwe says this assistance will give it an upper hand in dealing with the global pandemic.
You are making us the masters over COVID-19. And this is, an opportunity for us to be able to beef up our preparedness.
The refurbishment is expected to be completed in about 10 days. Farai Wakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
The Ugandan government says it will not accept any more asylum seekers over the next 30 days, starting Friday the 20th. It is the latest measure taken by authorities to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Uganda still has no confirmed cases, despite the virus being present in neighboring countries. Here's Isabel Nakiria with more.
This is the first time in decades that Uganda is closing its doors to new asylum seekers. Uganda is the largest refugee hosting country in Africa and has in the past been praised for its friendly policy to refugees. But it says shutting out the coronavirus now is more key. Refugee settlements in the country have been advised to close reception centers immediately. And for the over 1.4 million refugees already in the country, they've been asked to keep basic hygiene and to avoid crowds and unnecessary movements. Health teams working within the settlements will keep an eye on the health of the refugees and to detect early signs and symptoms of the virus. Isolation spaces within the reception centers are being set up to manage any confirmed cases. The government has also instructed security personnel to work closely with the settlement commandants to ensure compliance. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
The South African government has identified over 30 places to be used as quarantine sites should the COVID-19 outbreak worsen. And as CGTN's Travis Andrews reports, the move is part of plans approved by Cabinet to control the increase in cases of infections in the country.
Most of them are empty.
With more than 200 coronavirus cases now officially confirmed by the government, the state is preparing to step up its response to battle the spread of the disease. They'll be using some government buildings around the country that were selected to absorb patients requiring the treatment for COVID-19, a move that is meant to divert some pressure off the country's fragile healthcare system.
In terms of the government's emergency response plan, in preparation that we will see the infection rate increase, we're concerned especially about the people living in informal settlements. So we have identified 37 sites for quarantine purposes. Because if you need to be quarantined in an informal settlement, there will not be the necessary facilities or the conditions conducive to stay there.
There is a very real concern that the coronavirus infection rate could spike significantly once it finds fertile ground within township communities. The government properties selected range from hospitals with available capacity to state-owned homes that can be used if necessary. Nothing is off the table in this evolving public health emergency.
We're working together with the provincial governments also to identify buildings owned by them and the municipalities. The plan is to cover 44 districts in our country plus the 8 metropolitans.
Parliament has also shut its doors due to the coronavirus fears and is currently undergoing a deep cleaning with the aim of opening once the situation allows. All three spheres of government have been hard at work at trying to stay ahead of the curve when it comes to the coronavirus mitigation measures. There is one worrying concern though. That is the amount of pressure that this could place on public hospitals in the country. But the government is keen to avoid a public health crisis at all costs.
We are working to try and avoid that imploding situation that would necessitate a lot of people to be hospitalized. We're trying to put more preventative measures so that if the rate of infection is controlled.
The private sector has also been engaging with the state over the use of other spaces as well, such as parking lots and privately owned land for additional quarantine capacity. Many here though are hoping that none of these measures will hopefully be needed. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
In Ghana, the COVID-19 pandemic has left many trying to adjust their lifestyles. This follows the government's ban on all religious gatherings and social activities with large crowds. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra.
Unlike a typical Friday where Muslims hold congregation to perform the Jummah prayers, today is different in this mosque. The large gatherings for prayers has been cancelled and only 25 people are allowed to pray here. And also, they keep some distance from each other.
We are obeying the government's directive so that we can prevent the spread of the coronavirus.
Away from the mosque, life hasn't changed so much along the streets of Accra and in the market. It's business as usual. But some say they are paying more attention to personal hygiene.
I wash my hands and also use sanitizers. That's what I can do to prevent the coronavirus.
The government has urged people to practice social distancing in order to curb the spread of COVID-19. But the impact of the pandemic has yet to be felt by some Ghanaians. Here at this lorry station, buses still load 16 passengers and people sit close together. It may take a while for people here to fully react to the global health crisis. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Meanwhile, as Kenya continues to sensitize the public on ways to curb the spread of COVID-19, community volunteers have been conducting a door-to-door campaign to inform the elderly about the disease. CGTN's Noel Makugu has more.
Kibera, a sprawling and highly populated informal settlement at the heart of Kenya's capital, Nairobi. A few residents here have access to running water, but most of them, like Fatima Juma, have heard of the novel coronavirus.
I just hear people mentioning the virus here and there, but God will help us and see us through. Nothing more. Our fate lies in the hands of God. Even if we run and hide, there's nowhere to go.
Despite knowing the disease is highly contagious, the 82-year-old doesn't know its symptoms. Social distancing is the highest measure the Kenyan government is advocating for, but in slums like this one, where families cluster into single rooms, a few here have the luxury to isolate. Juma believes that everyone needs freedom to move around.
If your child is sick and you want to take them to hospital, or you want to attend a burial, if your kin dies, that becomes a challenge because you are asked to remain indoors. How can that happen if you don't have food in the house? You must go and get the food.
Kenya has 7 confirmed cases of the COVID-19 so far. As the threat of a possible spread becomes imminent, the government is leaving nothing to chance in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic. Shonela Lupuana, CGTN.
We turn to Italy now, where the coronavirus pandemic has reached a critical point, particularly in the northern province of Lombardy. It's been announced today that more than 2,500 people in total have died in this particular region alone from COVID-19. More people have died in Italy now from this virus than anywhere else in the world.
In Lombardy, things look critical. It's been announced today that more than 2,500 people have died in this region alone from COVID-19. More people have died in Italy from this virus than anywhere else on the planet. The number of dead now at 4,032 people, with 47,000 infections. The last 24 hours have been the deadliest for Italy. The virus took 627 lives. Every night, Italians are hearing about a number of fatalities that you would only expect in a war zone. Multiple times per hour, I hear the sound of the sirens of the ambulances taking patients to hospitals that are mostly at capacity. The governor officials here in Lombardy want to increase restrictions on the region, which has already been under lockdown for 12 days. The army is being deployed and officials are asking for a stop to all public transport. Of course, people here in Italy are shocked. They've gone from a situation where on February the 21st the outbreak started with 1 case in the small town of Codogno. Now, less than a month on, 4,000 people have died.
Now in the UK, the government has ordered public spaces, including cafes, bars and restaurants, to close as of Friday night. The measure comes as the death toll reached 177, with almost 4,000 confirmed cases. CGTN correspondent Naveed Jabakal has more.
It's taken the UK longer than some other countries, but life is slowly winding down here. Streets in the capital London are emptier, and on Friday, schools closed across most of the country. As Britain gears up for more of a lockdown, all eyes are on the official advice.
Bit by bit, day by day, by your actions, your restraint and your sacrifice, we are putting this country in a better and stronger position where we will be able to save literally thousands of lives.
Cafes, bars, restaurants and gyms were ordered to close down on Friday as part of social distancing measures. Official scientific advice said some of those measures would be needed for most of the year, despite the Prime Minister saying the tide will turn against the coronavirus in just 12 weeks. The main concern for the government here is how will the Public Health Service cope with the upcoming rise in cases that's expected in the coming months. It's a service that's already stretched thin, partly due to cuts introduced by Mr. Johnson's own party. Officials, as well as doctors and nurses, find themselves in the uncomfortable position of preparing for this pandemic with limited resources. The government has written to more than 65,000 retired healthcare workers in a bid to get some back to work. And more money is being thrown at the problem too. Finance Minister Rishi Sunak pledging to subsidise the wages of workers impacted by COVID-19. As another week draws to a close, many citizens here find themselves in a bit of a limbo. Not quite locked down, but anxious about what's coming next. Naveed Jabakal, CGTN, London.
And to the US now, there is growing concerns that the coronavirus outbreak there will follow the same trajectory as Italy, or even worse. And it's put President Donald Trump's handling of the epidemic front and center. CGTN's Timothy Ulrich takes a look.
Mr. President, do you have a plan to contain the coronavirus in the U.S.?
On January 22nd, Trump told reporters everything was under control. After all, the U.S. had just one confirmed case. By February 26th, there was a travel ban on foreign nationals who had recently been to China, and Trump appointed Vice President Mike Pence to head the efforts against the outbreak. The U.S. already had 57 known cases.
To the American people remains very low.
Then 2 days later, the president claimed that Democrats were weaponizing the virus against him, sensationalizing the risk.
And this is their new hoax.
That day, the first case with unknown origins was reported, and the following day, the U.S. would report its first death. By March 6th, there had been 14 deaths out of a total 262 confirmed cases. Meanwhile, Trump came out saying the U.S. had ample test kits.
But anybody that needs a test can have a test.
The leading figure from COVIDtracking.com estimated the U.S. had carried out just under 2,300 tests since the outbreak began. And the stock market was sliding as trading closed for the weekend. When trading ended on Monday, March 9th, it was being called Wall Street's worst day in a decade. 583 cases had been confirmed, with 22 deaths. Trump unleashed a barrage of tweets saying the flu was worse than COVID-19 and blaming the market plunge on dropping oil prices. Then by March 11th, the U.S. had crossed the 1,000 case threshold, and the worst was yet to come.
Today, the World Health Organization officially announced that this is a global pandemic.
By March 13th, 2 days later, there were almost 2,200 cases with nearly 50 deaths. And Trump raised the stakes.
I am officially declaring a national emergency.
Another 2 days later, the U.S. had over 4,600 cases and 85 deaths. Americans were stocking up, clearing out supermarkets. Trump called for calm once again.
Relax. We're doing great. It all will pass.
As testing increased, the extent of the outbreak was becoming clearer. By March 20th, confirmed cases almost doubled, reaching nearly 15,000 with over 200 deaths. But when it came to addressing public concerns, Trump wasn't having any of it.
What do you say to Americans who are watching you right now who are scared?
I say that you're a terrible reporter. That's what I say. Go ahead. I think it's a very nasty question, and I think it's a very bad signal that you're putting out to the American people.
In the name of Jesus, we thank you. Some had faith, as Trump said the virus would disappear like a miracle. But many others are just hoping for the best and preparing for whatever they can as the numbers continue to climb. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
Now, in many parts of China, volunteers have been playing an essential role in helping local community members during this difficult time. As CGTN's Chu Hao reports, one foreign resident is being praised for his efforts to look after the people in his neighborhood.
When the COVID-19 epidemic reached its peak in Beijing, one foreigner in particular chose to come out and help others. His name, Ali Albert, from West Africa. Having lived in his Beijing community for over 6 years, he took the liberty of helping his 40 foreign neighbors through the epidemic.
I have this advantage of speaking English, French, Chinese, so all my these languages skills. Thought myself like, okay, I could provide some help.
That help has been going on for 3 weeks. Albert has taken on a wide range of responsibilities, from recording temperatures to sorting deliveries, from checking IDs to explaining new policies.
What we do mostly is we talk with people, because it's important to talk face to face, to share the information. They talk with you, they kind of have a feeling of safe and taken care of.
Beijing now requires people returning to the capital from overseas to quarantine for 14 days. Alex Rance came back from the U.S. and later quarantined because a passenger on her flight was infected with the virus.
And obviously very scared when I started coughing and running a fever. I had to be quarantined, and they helped me figure out how to go through the processes and get groceries. And then when I was sent to the hospital, they also helped facilitate all of that and make sure somebody took care of my cats. So once I was out of quarantine, I wanted to volunteer as well.
Alex says the biggest concern for foreign residents is the no guest rule. No one who lives outside the community is allowed in, which has created inconvenience for some.
For my friends with children, they're still concerned about childcare because their IEs can't come into the compound. So they've been having to take turns taking days off to watch their kids.
What we try to explain to them is that right now is a very particular time. They have to be patient and understand this new rule and try to follow it, because it's not gonna last forever.
And for the community as a whole, the volunteer groups bring everyone closer together.
Their presence has boosted the confidence of other residents. Seeing them every day makes the rest of the community feel secure, and it creates this bond between people that is so valuable.
Like the saying goes, a friend in need is a friend indeed. Volunteers, whether Chinese or foreign, stand out when everyone is going through difficult times. And when those times are over, life goes on, but the memories stay. 崔慧耀 CGTN Beijing.
Another news coming up after the break. Massive deforestation in Somalia linked to illegal trade in charcoal. And South Africa marks the 60th anniversary of the Sharpeville massacre, in which 69 people were killed.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Human Rights Day celebrations in South Africa have been marred by a growing tally of coronavirus cases in the country. Now, this year marks the 60th anniversary of the Sharpeville massacre, when 69 people protesting against apartheid laws were killed by police. With mass public gatherings banned to slow down the spread of COVID-19, human rights events have also been called off. South Africa has reported just over 200 cases so far. CGTN's Julie Ashaya sat down with residents of Sharpeville to recount the steps from that historic day.
On the 21st of March 1960, thousands of South Africans left their passbooks at home and went to police stations to be arrested. Lindy Mtongana was just 6 years old. His father was among the thousands who marched peacefully to the Sharpeville police station.
Our fathers kept us indoors and they came here at this police station. They came here at the police station. From there we only heard cries. So my father came back and said, hey, you, don't go outside. And after that, there came these tankers.
Things went horribly wrong. 69 people died fleeing from police. More than 180 were wounded. Mtongana's father escaped unharmed, but his other relatives never returned home. Local storyteller KC Rueli also lost his uncle.
The police came with the whole might to make sure that they silence them forever, you know. The whole idea of shooting was to silence people. They should never say a word for the rest of their lives.
Commemorations usually done on this day have been cancelled amid fears of COVID-19, but the many Sharpeville heroes who died fighting for freedom will never be forgotten.
Today, children play freely on the streets, but Sharpeville residents who still live in poverty say they've never realized true freedom.
The freedom we got, but not a good life, you see, because we are still struggling with it now. We don't have anything.
We have no hope. We are just empty. So the human rights, the freedom, yes, they are there, but it's just a smell. It's like having money, but you cannot afford to go into a shop to buy yourself food, or your money could not be a right currency.
Sharpeville has been neglected like many other townships in South Africa. Crime is rampant and unemployment is high. Residents here say it's now up to them to change their fortunes around. Julie Shara, CGTN, Sharpeville, South Africa.
Somalia is one of many African countries facing the consequences of climate change, but the situation there has been worsened by the illegal trade of charcoal. This despite an existing ban by authorities and the United Nations. CGTN's Abdulaziz Below reports from Mogadishu.
This is one of the biggest charcoal markets in Mogadishu. Huge trucks bring charcoal here every day from regions surrounding the capital to meet the city's increasing demand. One sack of charcoal goes for as much as $10. The charcoal sold at this market is mostly brought from the lower Sharpeville region, a rich agricultural area that's considered the breadbasket of the nation.
Majorly it's because of the huge demand locally for the subsistence and household cooking. Over 90% of the Somali households need charcoal for cooking and heating. And secondly, it is because of the availability of the market. Specifically, the Gulf Arab countries are willing and ready to take the charcoal produced and exported from Somalia.
Charcoal smuggled out of the Horn of Africa often fetches at higher prices in Gulf markets. The country recently sought for tougher UN sanctions after it emerged that a ship carrying more than 200,000 bags of charcoal were exported to Iraq from an undisclosed port in southern Somalia. Militant group Al-Shabaab has in the past made millions of dollars from the illegal charcoal trade. Environmentalists are now calling for increased awareness in efforts to combat desertification as the country continues to lose trees at an alarming rate to illicit charcoal trade.
Somalia is yet to be ready to face the challenges of environment. Environment is not number one priority for the government of Somalia and for the federal member states of Somalia. And also the community capabilities and the community attitude is also very low, and the environmental education awareness is also very low. That shows us that in the coming years is going to create massive influx of rural-urban migration.
A cycle of drought, famine and flooding in recent years has increased the country's humanitarian needs. Pastoralists have been forced to move from one region to another as competition over natural resources increases. Millions have also been displaced in the country as a result of climate change.
There is a pressing need to establish the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. There's also need to establish, as you mentioned, key critical policies and legislation and regulations, including the charcoal policy, including environmental management policy, which has been recently passed. But there is also need Environmental Management Act or the bill. There's also need EIA Act, Regional Management Policy, Rangeland Act. All those regulations and acts also need the implementation and the enforcement. And above all, there is also need to change the perceptions and attitudes of the communities. And that is where the gap exists, because unless we change the attitude of the communities into positive, then any laws and any regulations will not take any effective.
Environmentalists have now begun efforts to educate people on the importance of planting trees. The exercise is taking place in schools and universities. Abdul Aziz Bilon, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Well, still in Somalia, efforts are continuing to control the Locust invasion in the country. The semi-autonomous region of Somaliland is now spraying biopesticides and increasing surveillance efforts using an innovative tool called Locust 3. CGTN's Tuli Shabalala has more.
Somaliland is trying to contain the formation of new swarms of desert locusts. Control operations were recently carried out on the outskirts of Garissa town. The breeding grounds have been sprayed with pesticides.
We prefer to use this pesticide, biopesticide, for safety to the animal. We have many of livestock in Somaliland, in Somaliland, and also this biopesticide safety for the friendly for the environment, and also the safety for the people in the area or the community people, and also for the staff that spray this biopesticide.
Now, a new innovative tool called the Locust 3 is set to enhance surveillance. Locust 3 technology gathers data transmitted via satellite to the Food and Agriculture Organization. It then gives updated information about the current situation in the field in real time.
When you send it, the report by it sent directly and on time when you are conduct control or survey. And though in the up to the Roma they send, and also to the region, the Locust office in the region. So it is very important, and also it have many of the information inside of it for about the desert locust.
The desert locust is considered to be the most destructive pest in the world. A swarm covering 1 square kilometer contains 40 million locusts that can eat the same amount of food in one day as 35,000 people. The Food and Agriculture Organization says the situation is extremely alarming in East Africa, a region where 20 million people are already considered to be food insecure. Tuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Let's take a short break. Your business news up next. Coming up, Uganda turns to the World Bank for a 190 million cushion against the economic impact of the coronavirus. And the Trump administration to send representatives to Saudi Arabia for talks on stabilizing the global oil market.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
U.S. officials say the Trump administration plans to send a senior energy representative to Saudi Arabia for talks on stabilizing the global oil market. This comes after Saudi Arabia and Russia kicked off a price war. This after their 3-year deal to restrain output collapsed this month. Oil prices have lost more than half their value in the last 2 weeks. The crash is also devastating to U.S. oil producers. A regulator from oil-producing Texas suggests cutting the state's oil output by 10% if the federal government could negotiate with Saudi Arabia and Russia to match cuts. Well, as the world continues to grapple with the rapid spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, multiple flights have been cancelled or temporarily suspended across the continent. Now, according to the International Air Transport Association, African airlines have recorded a loss of up to $4.4 billion in revenue since the pandemic surfaced last December. Jobs are also at stake in the industry as airlines struggle to cope with falling demand. Outside Africa, Middle East airlines are heading into $7.2 billion in lost revenues. As many as 16,000 flights have been cancelled in the region since January, and further cancellations are expected as governments continue to impose restrictions. Now, South Sudan's central bank is set to promote cashless transactions as part of measures to prevent the spread of COVID-19. At the moment, Juba is free of the pandemic that is ravaging the world, but the government has introduced measures to ensure it remains unaffected. With more on this, here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet.
Most transactions in South Sudan are done using cash, but the Central Bank of South Sudan wants to change that. With increasing cases of COVID-19 reported across Africa, it fears that South Sudanese people face the risk of contracting the virus when using cash.
The switch has benefit to all stakeholders or financial institutions. It can be used for cross-border retail payments through mobiles and cards.
However, the change from cash to cashless transactions may still take some time. The Bank of South Sudan says it is consulting with commercial banks on how to roll out the products. South Sudan has suspended flights from Egypt and the United Arab Emirates over what it says are measures to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. Travel agents say the suspension of the flights is costing them money.
We are here because of the airlines. If the airlines are not operating, actually we will not be in a business. So it's our wish that this thing shall have to come to an end as soon as possible. A solution has to be found so that we'll be able to continue. Cancellation of flight means we don't have a business.
The members of the public here are now taking measures to avoid the spread of the coronavirus.
The moment Juba is safe, but we are still afraid. We are using hand sanitizers, and we are also having plans in case of any virus in this country.
South Sudan's new government is just being set up, and the World Health Organization is scaling up operations to help the new unity government fight the spread of the coronavirus. Years of civil war in South Sudan has negatively impacted on health system in the country, with hospitals struggling to manage treatable diseases such as malaria, and the fear here is that importation of coronavirus could pose a serious threat to the entire country. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
The South African Reserve Bank's decision to cut interest rates by 100 basis points has been applauded by many. However, it's doing little to calm the markets as concerns over the impact of COVID-19 grow. Economists also argue that the Apex Bank will have to go further than its biggest interest rate cut in more than a decade to support South Africa's already struggling economy. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu has more.
It was a bold move by the Reserve Bank. The lower interest rate will provide some much-needed relief to a seriously battered economy.
The reduction in 100 basis points is quite timely and will provide much necessary relief to consumers, particularly consumers who have credit, who have loans, and who have mortgages, to ensure that the cost of that debt becomes increasingly cheaper in a time when the economy is not growing.
But will it be enough? South Africans are heavily indebted and have had to contend with rising costs. The massive economic impact of COVID-19 is yet to be calculated, but the costs thereof are mounting.
In the third quarter and the fourth quarter of this year, there is a possibility of other 25 basis point reduction, which is about 50 basis points reduction for the rest of the year. And of course, in 2021 as well, another 25% basis point reduction. So that 100 basis point reduction was really, I think, giving them space to be able to conduct further reductions in the event that there's a need to do so later on in the year.
We have a lot more room to bring interest rates down than most other countries. So I think it will help quite a bit. Obviously, it needs supplementary help from fiscal policy, tax cuts and spending and so on. But at least we're getting something done in the right direction now.
There's no doubt that this rate cut will provide some much needed relief, but it's definitely not the fix that this economy needs right now, especially with the spread of COVID-19.
If you have an instance where you're injecting a lot of capital into the marketplace and you're hit by a pandemic such as COVID-19, it means that there will be a lot of capital but low demand or low spending in the marketplace.
But ultimately, I think they're probably going to have to provide buying of government bonds so that government can spend a bit. It seems to be being done everywhere in the world. And if it's a coordinated effort between all the countries in the world, I don't think it will have an impact on our currency or our inflation at this moment in time.
Government says it is looking at ways of assisting consumers and businesses, but no announcements have been made thus far, and it's not clear whether the Reserve Bank will consider pumping liquidity into the economy. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, Nigeria's economy is going through tough times, firstly because of the COVID-19 outbreak, but also because of a major drop in global oil prices. Experts say the government may need to do more to strengthen the economy and prevent a possible recession. Our correspondent Phil Ihaza reports from the nation's capital, Abuja.
This digital printing business in Abuja is run by Uloma Ogbonna. Although it's rather busy here today, Uloma says she may be out of business anytime from now as the cost of production is gradually becoming unsustainable.
If we cannot afford to buy our materials for printing, we will not be able to continue to run as a business. So we're praying that government looks into this as soon as possible and does something, brings out measures to contain this while they still can.
Nigeria's economy depends largely on earnings from oil exports. But since the outbreak of coronavirus, global demand for oil has dropped and prices are at record lows. This has dealt a big blow to Nigeria's currency, the naira. The government has had to rely on spending its foreign reserves to sustain the economy. The Central Bank of Nigeria says it may soon be forced to devalue the naira before the country exhausts its reserves. Experts say a devaluation of the naira may spell doom for the country's economy.
I don't think Naira should be devalued in any way. Nigeria is not an exporting country. Nigeria is a net importer of manufactured goods. People will import anyway, and when they import, they will still sell to the population, and this will lead to inflation. It doesn't make sense. I don't think government should follow that path. CBN should not yield to the pressure.
The central bank has announced a $2.7 billion intervention fund to support various sectors of the economy, including small and medium-scale enterprises. But experts say the government will need to take drastic steps in order to cushion the effect of these tough economic times.
There are three things we could do. First of all is to raise interest rates and for CBN to intervene. 50% of the CBN to intervene, raise interest rates so that we are covered on short term. On medium term, we need to do fiscal adjustments. Fiscal adjustment in the sense that monies were actually going to subsidy. There's no need for subsidy again because global oil prices is down. Take that money, use it to support what is coming from foreign reserve so that Naira is further protected. Long term is diversification.
President Muhammadu Buhari has stressed that his administration would explore all alternatives to protect the country's economy from slipping into a recession.
The hope is that measures taken by the government and the central bank will help shield Nigeria's economy from recession while the world battles to contain the spread of coronavirus. But with no end in sight to the crisis, interventions may not be able to protect citizens and businesses from an economic crunch. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Now in Kenya, flower firms have shed a fifth of their casual workforce and sent a similar number on compulsory leave. The industry is struggling to survive the aftershocks of the coronavirus lockdown. The cancellation of overseas orders and travel restrictions in highly affected countries has hit the industry hard. The sector is experiencing an estimated 40% plunge in sales, and this has forced firms to turn on their 150,000-strong workforce to save their companies from outright losses. The Kenya Flour Council has warned that the headcount could drop to 20,000 in the next few weeks. Kenya's earnings from horticulture exports include flowers, fruits and vegetables. Altogether fell 7% in 2019 to $1.35 billion. This from $1.46 billion. Now, this is mainly due to lower prices of flowers at the auctions in the Netherlands. Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Dress codes and dancing, how the exit of Bashir is expanding cultural freedoms in Sudan.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
It's almost 10 months now since the former president of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, was overthrown. As the nation ushers in a new era, young people have seized the moment and are now dancing to new beats and showing off their new and trendy fashion.
Dress codes and dancing. Sudan is seeing a new culture thaw after Omar al-Bashir. This is the new face of Sudan. The music is Tanzanian hip-hop, popularly known as bongo flavor. Since the ouster of former President Omar al-Bashir, newfound freedom is giving rise to talents unheard of in this North African country.
Before the revolution, our shows were mostly inside during events or things like that. But now that there's freedom, we're practicing in parking lots. We've started to work normally without any restrictions.
A few blocks away, this hip-hop producer, whose studio was dismantled and equipment seized during the protests, is now back in business. He's currently laying tracks for new local hits.
Revolution, change, freedom, our rights, our duty towards our country and how we will build it. There are new and rich topics, so it helped a lot and started increasing among musicians.
Omar al-Bashir rose to power in 1989 in a bloodless coup. Islamists who had backed him influenced him to introduce strict social and religious rules that limited freedoms and choice of dress, especially for women. The laws have since been scrapped, and locals, both young and old, are now singing and spotting trendy fashions.
The freedom that came along allowed people to express themselves and produce more work in the arts, including music. On the university level, we feel that things are improving. We expect the university to progress, especially given that the previous regime was very closed. It did not have room for many things, including art and music.
Women were on the front line in the protest that eventually ousted al-Bashir. Music provided the perfect background for the revolution that ushered in a new dawn.
We understand that change won't happen tomorrow because of the revolution. It will take time, but what's new after the revolution is that there's hope and that things can change. And it is in our hands to change the things we see as wrong in the academy, in the country, or at work. These are things that we can change ourselves.
True change may be slow, but the current musical and fashion revolution is setting the tone for this nation that now seeks to break the chains of the past. Hlanela Lupuwana, CGTN.
And coming up in your sports news, up next. South Africa's Legends Youth Football Club disappointed following the cancellation of the Man City Abu Dhabi Cup due to the coronavirus pandemic.